young people being radicalized, impressionable young people being radicalized, and we know that in many instances this is being done through the internet, people sitting in front of their computers, and they are being convinced by forces outside the country. What causes this radicalization in the first place?
Well, if I could just pick up what John was saying, I don't think there are radicalized mosques, radicalized speakers. I can speak about the UK. For example, since September 11th, we've done loads of work to root out the extremist preachers. So you won't find a mosque now that endorses or encourages extremism or glorifies terrorism, as we've seen in the past. And I think that's evident to the fact that the Muslim community, both here in the UK and around Europe, recognizes that we've got to take on this cancer from within our midst. You're right that there is a problem when it comes to radicalization of young people through the internet, and that's a real big problem. I think the internet companies, social media sites have allowed over the last few years, very sickening videos and glorification of ISIS crimes in the Middle East and around the world. And I think, they've got to take some responsibility. But all of us, we all got to do whatever we can to root out the cancer, take on the ideology of violence. And, I think it's important to remember that whilst we are talking here about a terrorist attack in Barcelona, we have seen terrorist atrocities here in the UK, here in my home city of Manchester, but also by the far right in Charlottesville and the far right in Finsbury Park Mosque. So there are two types of extremism and terrorism that we have to confront, and that's evident over the events of the past few months.
John, you want to say something?
Yeah, I want to underscore also, again, the importance of effective counterterrorism, and I think due credit needs to be given to Spanish authorities. This is the first attack in Spain since the horrific 2004 Madrid bombings. So for 13 years, they've been able to thwart attacks. There have been dozens of arrests, and back in February, there was a major report about stepped-up efforts by Islamic State seeking out Spanish-language translators, publishing in Spanish, and encouraging individuals to attack tourist sites and soft targets, so to speak. And there was actually a major series of arrests back in April in conjunction with Belgian authorities following on the March 2016 attacks in Brussels. And so you do see very effective counterterrorism, but unfortunately, as this atrocity today demonstrates, all the terrorists need to do is be able to effectively strike once and wreak havoc the way that they have.
All right, and Peter, where you have a terrorist using a car or a truck, a vehicle, which is not going to be immediately suspicious, intelligence becomes incredibly important, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And although this is obviously an absolutely horrific act, we shouldn't be either surprised or shocked. In fact, we were told way back in 2010 by Al-Qaeda through its slickly produced online magazine Inspire, and then in 2014 by one of the founders of the so-called Islamic State and its spokesperson who was killed in a U.S. airstrike last year, that the individuals that are motivated by terrorism need not go to buy bombs or firearms, that they should use things that are readily available. And he infamously said, smash their heads with a rock, slaughter them with a knife, drive over them with an automobile, throw them down from a very high place, choke them, or poison them. And we have horrific examples of that. Obviously, the Nice, France attack last year on Bastille Day, then later the horrific Berlin attack during a holiday market, Stockholm, and most recently at Ohio State here in the United States, and yesterday, or a couple of days ago, in Charlottesville, Virginia. So vehicles are a very low tech, but unfortunately a very lethal type of vehicle for causing these horrific acts.
Right, and hard to detect as well. David, as Peter says, we shouldn't be surprised or shocked that these attacks are taking place. Have we got to that very sad situation right now where we're going to have to live with this until we can finally overcome it in some way?
That's true, but also I think that is not an acceptable message from European politicians. When I'm in Europe, and obviously just as the US's political system is on edge, so too is very much the European system. The pace of attacks that you've had with these devastating large-scale attacks with 13, 80, 130 people being killed, that's just not something that the continent can absorb indefinitely. And we can already see European politics changing as a result. I think politicians there need to have a better answer than that this is just the new normal.
Let's go back to Dan in Barcelona. And Dan, we've got reports that one person handed himself over to police. This was a person who was thought to have rented the vehicle that was used in this attack. It turns out now that he says that his documents were lost and his documents were used. What do we know about this?
Yes, that's right. You're talking about Driss Ubakir, who police issued a photograph of him earlier just following the attack, in the aftermath of the attack. But it would appear that he handed himself in, according to reports, some 106 kilometers away, and said that his identity documents were indeed stolen. So there have been further reports, and of course we're further now speculating, but those reports suggest that it could well have been passed on to a family member or to someone that he knew. That is, of course, a line that police will be, of course, looking into. But at this stage, it would appear as though the person who they thought perhaps who rented the van was in fact not that person. But of course, this is still very early on in the investigation. Police will continue to find out whether there is indeed any kind of link at all.
And Dan, I want to ask you about Barcelona itself. It's a pretty unique city in Spain because it's part of Catalonia, which is for a long time wanted to be independent from the rest of Spain. And one looks at why the city was targeted in this way. What is the Catalan government saying about this?
Well, as you can imagine, the Catalan government here are completely dismayed and horrified by these attacks. There's going to be a 3-day period of national mourning with flags being flown at half-mast. There will also be a minute's silence at midday on Friday as well to honour the victims and those impacted by this tragedy. So certainly those in Catalonia here are shell-shocked with the events. Of course, we're very near the French border, and continuing on the debate that you're having there, that Barcelona has escaped for a large part terrorism attacks, but Spain as a whole has done a huge amount of effort in terms of locating and arresting suspected members of terrorism groups, those that are peddling radical documents, and Spanish authorities very much on the front foot, continually making those arrests, given the fact that, of course, the country stands on a terror level of 4 out of 5. So Spain, as well as the Catalonia region, very much trying to do all they can in order to stop these kind of attacks from taking place, and as the panel earlier suggested, have done a very good job up until now. But of course, given the very blunt use of a vehicle and how difficult it is to stop that, they have not been successful, of course, on this occasion, and we've seen, of course, the terrible impact that has.
Mohammed, is there a risk here that as one tries to counter these kinds of attacks, to minimize the risks that these attacks pose, you end up turning cities into fortresses? You end up stripping people of their freedoms, their liberties, for the greater good?
I think you're absolutely right. There is an attempt by these terrorist groups to disrupt our freedom, our way of life, our openness, our tolerance, our diversity. The terrorists want to divide communities. That's very clear, that they set out, as a previous colleague was saying, to deliberately target tourist areas, whether it's Tunisia, in Turkey, in places of Libya as well, and Egypt. And now we see it in Barcelona, the great city of Barcelona. And so I think it's important that we all do whatever we can do to bring communities together, not allow the terrorists to divide us, and to be absolutely determined that we're going to take people on, and if we don't give up, then they'll, they won't give up, but we also won't give up. We'll hold on to our values and our freedom and our openness.
Right, John?
I think one of the great projects, to follow on Mohammed's point, for European leaders going forward is to more effectively find ways to have immigrant populations assimilated and effectively integrated into European societies. And I don't want to get into too much of a comparative analysis between the relatively lower number of these types of attacks we've had in the United States, but I think many can say that we've done a better job here in the US of integrating and assimilating immigrants in a way that many European societies have failed to do, so that you still have, even in Barcelona, you have several no-go neighborhoods, as you do in suburbs of Paris and other major European cities. This is simply unacceptable.
Right.
First of all, from a Western values perspective of openness and diversity, as Mohammed said, but also because this is where you breed radicalization more than any place else in any given country.
Okay, Mohammed, I'm going to give you a chance to very quickly respond to that, and then I want to go to Peter as well.
I just think part of the problem has been that we've mixed in the issue of security and terrorism with the issue of integration and cohesion. And I think that's a really dangerous thing to suggest, that somehow most of the terrorist atrocities that we've seen in the European mainland have been carried out by people who were born in Europe, who've been growing up. I could talk about the Manchester bomber, for example. He was born here in the UK, lived in the UK, brought up in the UK. So I think it's just quite simplistic to just blame the immigrants and blame integration when there are wider issues at stake here.
Okay, Peter, go ahead.
If I could just touch on something that Mohammed said that I completely and wholeheartedly agree with, and that is we don't want to live in police states, and we don't want to give up our valuable freedoms to assemble peacefully and free speech, and we want to live in areas that we are proud of and that we can allow our families to fully enjoy. Of course, the terrorists essentially or effectively win if we cave in to the fear. They have succeeded if they succeed in instilling such a degree of terrorism in our lives that we are willing to give up our liberties in exchange for complete and utter and ultimate security, which of course is valid to seek, but in the end, not attainable, then we've allowed them to win. And so we need to go out and we need to enjoy our lives and go to public events and have a public dialogue. And in fact, we need to make symbolic gestures and real life gestures of going to Las Ramblas in this particular case, and going to events, going to rock concerts, going to holiday markets, etc., to show the terrorists that they may damage and kill individuals, but they won't kill our spirit of liberty.
But we have also seen, Peter, that people are prepared to lose those liberties and freedoms, or have them suspended, let's say, to be safe.
Yeah, and I am certainly not faulting them, but I think as a society, we all need to become more resilient and to understand that there is no such thing as a completely secure environment, and that we should be very careful not to let the pendulum swing too far to the security side. There has to be a very delicate balance. And I think, as my co-panelists John and others have pointed out, the Spanish police and authorities in this case have always done a very good job. They unfortunately have tragic experience with the Basque separatist movement from years ago, and obviously, as John pointed out, the 2004 attack on the railway system that killed 192 folks. But they haven't bunkered down completely, and I think they deserve great credit for that.
All right. Dan, what has been your experience in Spain? Do you see this overwhelming security presence in the country? You know, because as John pointed out earlier, Spain has enjoyed quite a bit of success in keeping the peace and preventing these attacks. The last attack took place, what, 13 years ago, in 2004?
Yeah, on the whole, you have to say that having travelled around a lot of Europe over the last few months, that Spain has one of the most high-profile police presences that I've seen. I was in London last week, and in comparison to what you see here in Spain, it's very much on a much lower scale. You often see heavily armed police at the key sites across Spain, in Madrid, in Barcelona especially, fully armed with what looks like machine guns, with 3 or 4 police all at a time on patrol at these key spots. So certainly in terms of police presence, it's much higher here in Spain. As I say, it is on a terror level of 4 out of a possible 5. On top of that, authorities have also done a huge amount of work in arresting those that are indeed becoming radicalized, or suggested that there is some kind of radicalization element as well. So all of that together really does show that the Spanish authorities here are doing a huge effort in doing what they can to ensure that these kind of attacks don't take place. But of course, it is very difficult to stop an attack such as this nature.
David, I want to get to you very quickly. Is it time for governments in Europe, for the government here in the United States as well, to get really serious about looking carefully into where terrorists get their support from, especially financial support?
Yes, it is. But when it comes to ISIS, it had largely been a self-funding organization. It gets some remissions and the like, but a lot of what it had done was based on its ability to capture oil fields, capture banks and the like. Al-Qaeda, on the other hand, gets much more support from individuals who we really need to make more of an effort to clamp down on. Overall, this is a very complex problem set. I don't disagree with other guests that one of the key things we value about our society is its openness, its freedom. But the pace of attacks in Europe is something that would have been unthinkable 5, 6 years ago.
Right. John, very quickly.
I think that we really do need an answer to that.
Okay, I've got 10 seconds, John. Very quickly.
There are about 800 to 1,200 suspects that the Spanish police and authorities are monitoring very closely on a day-to-day basis. They work very effectively with other European governments in counterterrorism, but also credit needs to be given to the Moroccan government, which has worked very closely with the Spaniards on this very important project.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it, gentlemen. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.